My name is Ajmal Masroor, and some of you may have come across some of the things that I do. Usually, and mostly nowadays, I'm devoting a lot of my time in doing things around relationship. Relationship meaning relationships that we have with our families, our friends, with whoever. But more around husband-wife, mutual relationship. An integral part of our work is to do and talk about and of course educate our people on issues of sex and sexual intimacy. And that's the reason why the title that we have chosen, I chose for this particular program is called Sex and Intimacy. Because without the other, one without the other is not going to be fully understood. But before I go into explaining anything, I have a quick exercise that I like us all to do, which is I'm going to give you a piece of paper. So if we could get a piece of paper on which I would like you to note down 3 words that come to your mind as soon as you hear the word sex. Be as blunt, as honest and as brutal as you want. I would like you to write down on a piece of paper 3 words that come to your mind as soon as somebody mentions the word sex. Whatever comes to your mind, I want you to write it down on a piece of paper. These are some of the words that you have noted, the words that come to your mind as soon as you hear the word sex. Okay. Any surprises? How do people think of these words? Do you think that really is how people associate with the word sex? Yes?
These are people depending on which context and which culture.
Okay, say in the culture of the Muslims, in the Muslim community's context, because that's what we're talking about today. In the Muslim community context, as soon as people talk about sex, do you think these are the words that they associate with the concept of sex? Let's break it down. Let's help you break this even further. If I was to ask you to define sex, how would we define sex? So imagine this is sex itself in the middle. Throw me words that define sex for you.
Hedonistic.
Huh?
Hedonistic.
Hedonistic. Hedonistic, okay.
Physical contact.
Physical contact. Don't worry, it takes a bit of time before people warm up. And then they start saying things that they would really want to say. Contact, okay. Anything else?
Gratification.
Gratification, pleasure. Gratification. Anything else?
Animal instinct.
Animal instinct. Instinct. We're struggling, aren't we? We're struggling in defining it. Because conceptually, it's not something that people like to define. It's something that we all have to do at some stage in our life, because that's what our natural yearning is all about. But it's very difficult to define. And that's what we're struggling with. And that's the struggle everyone has all throughout their life, on issues which they feel definitions are not clear. And therefore the boundaries are not clear. Therefore relationship with that particular aspect of life isn't clear. So this is a definition of sex from this room. How does the society at large, imagine the society where we live today in Britain, the non-Muslim society, predominantly non-religious in its denomination, how do they define sex? How would they define sex, brother?
Lust.
Okay, there you go. So lust, what did you say?
Pleasure.
Pleasure, Urges.
And sort of instant gratification.
Instant gratification. So a definition which is ours, more conservative perhaps in the way we've defined it, and a bit more loose in the way the society defines it. So the 2 definitions that we have here, one is your definition: physical attraction, intimacy, reproduction, hedonistic, physical contact, gratification, animal instinct, relief, intercourse. Physical attraction, of course, is there. And for non-Muslim society, is all about lust, pleasure, relaxation, urges, instant gratification, no limits, shamelessness, freedom, physical act, status symbol, etc., etc. So now tell me, do you see any similarities between the 2 definitions? The definition that you think Islamically is there, and the society's definition. Do Muslims have lust? Of course, somebody says quite confidently. So Muslims have lust. Okay, good. That's a good starting. So the lust is common within the Muslims. Do Muslims feel relaxed after sex? Or does Islam allow us to have relaxation after sex? Or does relaxation, is it possible to be relaxed after having sex in an Islamic context?
I'm sure you're encouraged to.
Okay. Can you have pleasure?
Yes.
Can you have urges? Can you have instant gratification? No? Yes? Show of hands for yes. Show of hands for no. And not sure. Okay. 3 no's and the rest yes. So I'll leave that there with a question mark. No limits. Anyone here for no limits? So in Islam there are limits. Shamelessness? Not allowed. Freedom? Within sexual relationship, freedom is allowed. Islamically, I'm saying, do Muslims exercise freedom when they have sex? Okay, that's no problem, we'll come back. Physical act. Do Muslims think it's a physical act? Or do they just think it's a spiritual act? They think both? Okay. So physical act is another one. Status symbol. The more partners you have, the more manly you are. That's the 4-wife concept. Man's forever dream that they should have another wife, even though they don't have the first one. No? Okay, let's leave that. So here is the question I have for you, and I want you to really deeply think. These limitations, or sorry, these definitions, or the words of definitions that you have put out for us to view, and the ones on this one, the similarities are quite interesting, isn't it? That Muslims also have lusts. Muslims are also allowed to have relaxation, pleasure. They are also allowed to have urges. They're also allowed to be physically active in that particular way. And yet when I asked you for a definition of sex from an Islamic perspective, you didn't give it. Why did it come out when we talked about it from a non-Muslim perspective? Why was it okay to say the non-Muslims actually have lusts when it comes to sex, but Muslims no? In Islam, this topic, discussed in public, whether it's male and female in the same group, there is no reason for you not to use the right words to define it. The companions did. We're talking from the Islamic perspective, so let's cut to the chase. Companions did. Do you know the story when the woman would ask the Prophet, "O Prophet, what do you think of this particular position in sex?" And Prophet ﷺ would go completely red. Umar would go furious. These Medinan women are shameless. How on earth can they ask such a question? Umar being very tough and brutal with women. So Prophet one day said, even the angels are shy of Uthman, because Uthman is very soft. And even the devil is scared of Umar, because when Umar comes, devil takes a different route or different road. But that's a personality issue. So I want us to break away from that taboo mindset, and let's go as deep as possible and be as frank as we can, because it's that definition that we set that breaks the habit of a lifetime, or the misunderstanding that we hold in our hearts and minds, perhaps inspire us to getting into a habit or an addiction. I'm not saying you are, but that's what happens generally. So I am worried, and I'm urging you to now think about defining sex a bit more loosely. Let me help you. Sex is an act of pleasure, mutual or self, between a man and a woman. That's it. Now what else follows from it, what comes with it, before it, it's what we call the decorative part, the part that complements, that makes it nicer, beautiful, more cushioned. But the raw definition is an act of pleasure between a man and a woman, for pleasure for individual or both, mutual pleasure. The reason I say that is, in a sexual relationship, a man could satisfy himself without even worrying about his wife's satisfaction. Happens. Or the other way around, a woman could pleasure herself without a man's satisfaction. So there could be satisfaction, it doesn't have to always be mutual. But it's the act between man and woman, physical act between man and woman, that is called sex. And there is no harm in accepting that as a raw definition. Inspired by, of course, lust, urges, desire, etc. So, to be able to understand where your own sexual urges come from and what it is, I'm going to ask you to take a journey with me. Okay. It's a pyramid. Okay. A pyramid or a volcano type of an open thing. There are three layers. Anytime a human being finds sexual urges coming, the first part or the first port of call for sexual urges starts at this level. It's called urge, simple, or desire. You feel sexual, you want to explore, experience your sexual pleasure. This then leads to you desiring, developing, or accessing stimulation. In a marital relationship, a husband and a wife together, stimulating one another to take that urge to the next level, which is the act itself, sexual act itself, leading to a potential pleasure or disappointment or displeasure. Where people before I go to the next part, so do you understand what are your urges? What are the urges? What is an urge? What is a desire? What is desire when it comes to sex?
Feelings.
Yeah, so explain that a bit more. You feel what? Horny. Yeah, very good. Good word. Colloquial word, but it describes what it is actually. You feel slightly frisky, as they say. A bit more aroused. Not fully aroused, but your thoughts have begun to go in that direction. For a man, it happens very often. Right? Am I right or am I wrong? It happens very often. And let's face the truth. It happens very often. You're walking by, you see somebody, constant thought appears in your mind, constant thought. Luckily, alhamdulillah, we're not punished for our thoughts. Be grateful to Allah. Allah doesn't account us for our thoughts. Thoughts are not punishment. Thoughts are thoughts. You can't do anything about it. It's human. What you do with that thought is then accounted for. So initially, urges are when you feel like that. Some people ignore those feelings. In fact, the majority of the people ignore those feelings because you feel like this 60, 70 times a day. Subconsciously, in fact, we don't even realize that we feel like this many times a day as man, normal. If you were always aware of it, you'll be in trouble. Also, again, another blessing from Allah that you're not always aware of it. Happens. So you can ignore sometimes. It's not a problem. Most people who get addicted to sex are not addicted from this point onwards. It's what they do to the next level that becomes the problem. So I'll talk about this in a second, but I want to talk about the last part, which is the act itself. I'll come back to stimulation in a minute. So what's the act itself? Man and woman coming together, having sexual intercourse, because that's what they intend to do. That's the act. Simple. It doesn't require you to be a rocket scientist to understand that. So do you understand urge and desire and the act itself? I want to make the connection. Where does the urge come from? Yes?
I think certainly for the children I teach, it's the imagery, whether it's media, mobile phone, internet,
Okay.
conversation, where you certain words of a quite a crude, graphic nature, which then keeps that expression of thoughts, so to say.
Okay. So it's a constant stimulation, or what would we call stimulation, or less than a stimulation? It's not a stimulation even. It's what's a good word to describe something that's always around?
Exposure.
Huh?
Exposure.
Yeah, exposure to sexualized world. Very good word. Exposure to sexualized world gives you urges. An example, if you go into a Middle Eastern country where you hardly would see the opposite sex on a regular basis, and even if you do see them, they're more or less covered head to toe, it's very likely that your urges and desires would always find a way of diffusing themselves. You won't even realize. I've just come back from Yemen. I was in Yemen for a good 10 days. I can count the number of times I was consciously sexually aware. I can count the number of times. So 10 days I stayed in Yemen, and I came back and I was talking to my wife about it, and I said to my wife, this is amazing. I was in Yemen for 10 days, and in those 10 days, believe it or not, the only time when I had sexual thoughts were when I thought about you. She goes to me, it's very nice. I said, it is very nice. Because there was no other constant exposure to what the word you've used, the sexualized world. So the urges develop from that constant exposure, correct? But that's not an issue for us in the UK, because you have become desensitized to those constant exposure. I'm not saying Islamically is right or wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm just addressing a social issue. It's constant exposure. So you're right, absolutely, brother at the back, that young people constantly being exposed to these kind of stimulants are potentially, or they have a potential to go to the next level. Where else does this urge come from? But yourself, why are you so hesitant in accepting it? Allah has given you urge in your own self. It's a God-given thing. If you didn't have urge, there would be a problem. You would need to see a psychiatrist or a doctor to go and get some medication or to get some therapy to get the urge back in. Your libido would disappear. So urge is a natural thing. Never discount, or what's the word? Never feel ashamed of having urge. In fact, I have clients who come to see me who have erectile dysfunction, who cannot have an erection. Now imagine the life of a man who cannot have an erection. He's married and he's tried everything. You only have to experience it to know the pain of a man to go through that, especially if he is in a relationship. Every man sometime in their life will suffer from that particular problem. Every man. It's a natural thing. It's nature's way of giving you a break as well, or renewing the urge itself. But we're not talking about erectile dysfunction today. We're talking about urge. So urge is very natural. It's within you. And that's why urge is part of the blessing Allah has given you and I. It's a ni'mah. If we didn't have it, we'd be in trouble. So urge is no problem. Desire is no problem at all. Don't be ashamed of it at all. If somebody says, I have desire. A man came to the Prophet and said, Prophet, I feel like sleeping with this woman. Can you give me permission? Do you know this story? A young man came to the Prophet and said, O Prophet of God, I saw this woman, I really like her, I would like to have sex with her. Do I get permission from you? The Prophet looked at the man. Look at the frankness of his question. He is exposing himself to the Prophet and was saying, O Prophet, I have the urge. In fact, sexual urge of sleeping with her, I would like your permission for it. So Prophet ﷺ, what does he do? Slap him, bang, bang, go away, you nasty little boy. Gotta go and get a cold shower. Is that what he says? No, he doesn't say that. He says something very interesting. He says, why would you like to do that? He starts reasoning with the person. What for? What is your reason? So the boy says, I feel like it. Urge. I have the desire. She's attractive. She's good looking. Ali was looking at a woman. like this. And Prophet was next to him. So Prophet turned his eyes. Oh, Ali, come on man, what are you doing? Ali is a young man. I can just imagine that conversation. Ali, the first sight is allowed, the second one is from shaitan. Prophet said this to Ali instead of beating him up or dismissing his desires. So I want you not to dismiss the possibilities of desires. It's perfectly allowed. Urge is the most natural thing anyone can have, and I'm spending a bit of time so that you understand that there is nothing wrong, there is no shame in having an urge. No shame in it at all. Because it's internal, it's yours. And the sexual act, no problem. No problem, because you will have to do it with somebody who consents. And in Islamic context, it will be your wife. The problem is here. The active stimulation part. What am I talking about? Can anyone shed some light? What am I referring to when I'm talking about the active stimulation part becomes a problem? Acting on the thought. So I see a woman who is very attractive. What do I do now? So she's sitting like this. I can see her thigh. Do I peek a bit more? I wish she would show me a bit more. She's walking down the road. Her shirt buttons are open. I can see slight cleavage. Can I see a bit more? What do I do to my thought? Don't run away from the fact that men have these thoughts passing through their heads. Passing thoughts. If only she was showing a bit more. Every man thinks that. But what we are punished for, or what becomes a problem, is what you do with it. So a woman walking by and you see somebody and you whistle. A woman walking by, you say things to her. That becomes the next problem. Some more. How else do you act on your thought? Tell me. How else can you? Huh? So this is one person. Imagine one. There are lots of other ways. So let's move away from this one woman. Poor woman, we're attacking her. Are there any other ways of acting on our thoughts? Pornography, thank you. Pornography. So the acting of thought. So staring, I'll put it down. Staring, porn. What else? What else? Fantasy. You allow your head to get away with further thoughts. So when people do this, when people are actively looking for stimulation, what happens is that they now have to find a way of relieving or releasing what's built up, right? Because you've actively stimulated yourself. You've looked, you've done porn, you've done the chat room, chat line, you've gone out to pool, you've done all of those things, you've even fantasized. Now you need an active role, you need a vent. So I'll put it here as a vent. You need a release. So what people do is they either pay for sex, go out to prostitutes, some do. Don't worry, I've seen in places where I remember going to Amsterdam and came out of the airport, and as you go out to the main square, I saw a halal mat'am, halal restaurant. This is a halal restaurant, but on the right and on the left were two brothels. So I was wondering, in a district where all brothels are, why would there be a need for a halal mat'am, halal restaurant? So I walked into the restaurant owner and I said, I don't understand, this is a district, prostitute district, why do you have a halal restaurant? He goes, my Muslim customers who come to use the facilities around, they insist on having halal food. So the irony of it all is that they insist on halal food. But anyway, so you need a vent. So that vent is where some people go to prostitutes, pay for it. Some people masturbate. And some people have an unhealthy attitude towards sex in their relationship. I can't deal with the concept of the unhealthy attitude in your relationship today because the time doesn't allow me. But what I want to do, what I want to talk about, what I want to deal with is this vent, the area and environment where this becomes an active addiction. So something perfectly natural called urge desire, because you've actively gone and gone beyond what normally would be okay. You've come to a point where now you've either turned it into a productive environment for healthy relationship, or a quick release, and or in both environments become addicted. Let's go. You would do it regularly. Okay. There are guys, and you will read reports about them. I had actually not a report. I had a client who I had a person who was my client who has been married for nearly 20 years, and in their 20-year marital relationship, the guy is addicted to masturbation, even though he has regular sex with his wife. Now, how is that possible? Some of you may be thinking. To the point that it makes him physically sick and ill. So people are willing to extend that for a quick fix, but that's no longer a quick fix. It's become an all-consuming, all-empowering third party. It's like a possession. Something has taken over what your normal thought process should be normally. So for example, if a man sexually or has sexual intercourse with his wife, has had the release, it's very difficult for him to have another sexual act to follow immediately. It can be something possible when you're very young, but later on in life or in a regular steady relationship it's impossible almost. You need a few hours to recover and maybe again. But those who become addicted to it, they would resort to all sorts of ends to ensure that they're able to have what we call their fix, because of their overwhelming, or the possession I call. They need to respond to that desire, that overwhelming need. It's like somebody who's taking drugs. The withdrawal symptom starts making you shiver. The withdrawal symptoms make you moody. Withdrawal symptom for sexual addicts, it's unbelievable. It's huge. It's now documented what kind of withdrawal symptoms you get when a person is sexually addicted. And there are people like that. Obviously that's the extreme end. But because you have allowed your thought process, when you're trying to act it out and there is no vent for you, you have gone for the middle ground, the middle here, and you found addiction as a means of self-pleasure. Yeah, it's what happened with the Rochdale grooming case. That was quite severe. Criminal, of course, but there was a psychotic. They became psychopaths within the sexual realms. It does not diminish them of their responsibilities, no doubt about it. There was a long-running research done by one of the universities. I can't remember the one that did the research, but they followed a group of young people who actually had, of different age group actually, who were sexually addicted. They followed 3-4 guys, 3-4 girls, and they studied their life, and it was fascinating that the guy would, or the girl would, and they confessed to this, that they would go out with friends, and when the urge to have a release, they call it, it became overwhelming, all-consuming. They run to the bathroom to masturbate, in restaurants, in pubs, in shopping centers, and on a regular basis, 7-8 times a day, to the point of having blisters, open sores, bleeding private part. But for the person who is addicted, there is nothing they can do at that stage, because they have already given in to the overwhelming desire, this all-consuming desire. So it's about learning. What I'm doing to you right now is I'm trying to take you on a journey with me. So we define, get to understand the definition, where does it come from, where does it become a problem, and then what happens. How to fix it is a different discussion altogether. Maybe you can touch on that a bit later on. I'm not interested in giving you a quick fix, because I don't believe there's a quick fix. I want to focus on this from my own end, to show you what I believe to be a healthy attitude to sex, an unhealthy attitude to sex. So this is very healthy. Being married in a committed relationship is very healthy, no problem. If your wife and husband wants to have sexual intercourse 3-4 times a day, it's nobody else's business. It's none of your business. And they should not be going around bragging it to their neighbors or anybody else. That's why in Islam it's not allowed for you to say anything what you do behind the private doors of your own to anyone else. But we want to talk about this, where addiction happens. And I want to finish off by giving you one last statement that you may not like, but I'll put it up. Sex has only 2 rules. Actually 3. Forgot the third one. 3. Can somebody guess? In Islam, sex has only 3 rules. What are they?
One of them is penis and vagina.
Okay. Well, that's not a rule, but that's, you can't do them without it.
No, there's no anal even between a man and a woman.
So that's the rule.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is, so no anal. 1 rule. 3 rules, I said. We've got 1 only so far. Huh? So no sex during period. And third one? Yeah, married couple. That's it, man and woman married. So, married couple, I don't have enough space to write, but I'll write it small here. Married couple, and it has to be a man and woman. Anything else is not allowed in Islam. Now, does that shock you? Then in Islam, there are only 3 rules that one has to follow when it comes to a sexual relationship. It has to be between man and a woman, of course. Have to be married, that's number 1. Number 2, no anal and no sex during period. Everything else is allowed.
May I add one more
Yes.
exception?
Yes?
And it's not allowed when you're from Hajj especially.
There are lots of other acts which you can't do in Hajj. You can't have sex during prayers. So there could be a lot of lists. I'm talking about sexual act in itself, in the process itself. So does that shock anybody, or is that okay? Yes, brother.
The big problem is though, in society, there's so many barriers to getting married.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's not what we're talking about today,
Yeah.
but that's what
The social issues there. Yeah, I understand that. So distortion of sexual behavior is manifesting and becoming worse day by day because of all those social issues. Another discussion perhaps another day. But today I want you to go away with these thoughts. So an introduction to sex and addiction, starting from a definition, a human definition rather than just religious one, because human definitions are very similar, and a pyramid which shows you where it starts, where the problem begins, and if this could be pursued properly between husband and a wife, following no rule except 3, then it's a very good outcome. But if this is where distortion happens, then the outcome is pretty miserable.